On August 1st, President Trump fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics for reporting on economic data which were not favorable to him. Now, you should understand what this means. Every capitalist of any significant proportions in the United States relies on the government economic data for decisions on investment, marketing, and so on. So what Trump did, it was not an attack on people of color and on women or on the working class. It was not a defense of child molesters. What Trump did was an attack on the very stability of U.S. capitalism itself. And so, a few days later, the New York Times conservative columnist Thomas Friedman wrote a column in which he said that the America as we know it is slipping away. Now, again, we should understand who Friedman is. Friedman is one of the top spokesmen for U.S. capitalism. He's a total supporter of the military-industrial complex. He's very conservative. He supported the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and so on. In his column, Friedman pointed out that this was just the culmination of a whole series of firings by the Trump administration, and that these firings served the interests of Donald Trump personally rather than the interests of U.S. capitalism itself. Friedman concluded his column with the following words: "I'm a congenital optimist. For the first time, I believe that if the behavior that this administration has exhibited in just its first 6 months continues and is amplified for its full 4 years, the America you know will be gone, and I don't know how we will get it back." Now again, to emphasize, we have to keep in mind that this is not just anybody speaking. This is not some radical, not even some leftist, certainly not a conspiracy theorist. This is one of the foremost voices for U.S. capitalism. So a few days later, Friedman was interviewed on CNN. And here is what he had to say. And I recorded it because, among other things, I found it somewhat humorous. But it is also quite significant.
Shameful and shamelessness of these people, the people you count on. Dennis Hastert, the head of the economic advisors, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Jameson Greer, the head of the Trade Office, the key economic players of this administration, just sat there like a bunch of bobbleheads, nodding their head at what the president had alleged and done, fired this experienced, seasoned bureaucrat who has devoted her life basically to the government. And they all just sat there and did nothing. And John, you cannot have a democracy when party is completely not on the level, when it simply will not draw a single line around any excess or destruction of norms or destruction of institutions by this president.
In other words, these people, many of whom were important capitalists in their own right, are just simply capitulating to Trump rather than standing up for the interests of U.S. capitalism. Friedman then went on to talk about the international implications.
The reason Putin and President Xi of China, if they could have voted in our election, always would be voting for Trump, is they know that as long as Trump is at the helm in Washington, D.C., he can never build a coalition against them. And that is such a huge loss of amplification of our power that we are just throwing away our single greatest advantage, which is that we have allies and they don't.
Now, of course, it's untrue that the U.S. capitalists have allies and the Russian and Chinese capitalists don't, but that's beside the point. CNN's Silly John King then went on to try to offer some hope.
Is there a way to fix this if the people who won't speak out publicly can at least get to the president privately?
I don't think so. I mean, when those statistics come out next month, no matter what they say, how can anyone really trust them? When you break confidence like that, it doesn't just come back by naming a new person. And so, hey, Jen, can we just talk for 1 sec about the personal level? At the personal level, I don't know the woman who ran the BLS, okay? But all I know, she was a lifelong, government senior official, PhD. What about her personally? How would you like to be fired from CNN because the president said you rigged the news? You know what I mean? And you just get tossed out on the street from an institution you've devoted your life for. These are real people. And you do that without a shred of evidence. Shame on you for doing that. What a terrible thing to do to people. And that's nothing compared to, think of what they did to the head of the NSA, our National Security Agency, fired General Holden while he was on a trip to Japan because Laura Loomer, some loopy conspiracy theorist, said he was a friend of General Milley's. We're not seeing the terrible damage they're doing both to these institutions and to actual real people who have devoted their life of service to the U.S. government.
I want to come back to the Watergate point you made. Do you see any evidence that there's anyone out there withstanding in the Republican Party willing to stand up and call this out? I mean, they're in the first term there were some. Now there seem to be almost none.
They're all gone, John. The ones who would left. I tell people in my own life, my own person, I don't know anyone like these people. I don't get it. To me, they clearly live in houses that have no mirrors, no wives, and no daughters. Because if this were me, I could not look in the mirror for having sold my soul this way. My wife would have thrown my mattress out into the driveway with my golf clubs, and my daughters wouldn't speak to me. So I don't know what goes on in their houses, but that's what would go on in mine.